Hello and welcome back to AEF TV in association with Engerati. I'm now joined by Rob Schueffner, who is from Caterpillar. And Rob, first of all, thanks for making the time to be here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've been enjoying the conference so far and things like that. Now, Caterpillar is one of those names that I certainly associate with little toy trucks and stuff like that. Let's bring it up to a bigger scale. It's actually big trucks that you guys do. So what are you doing at an event like this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sometimes people think of cat boots or cat shoes as well as just machines or even just diesel electric power. But Caterpillar actually has an offering of natural gas recips, diesel recips for power generation, and gas turbines and other things. So a wide variety of products, and as part of that, we're also in renewable space. So that's the AEF is a very important conference for us to connect with our potential customers and make sure we get the word out that we're not just Caterpillar machines.
Yeah. So we'll go on to that renewables comment you just made a little bit further down the line. But
Sure.
One of the things I'd like to ask you on a more macro level, how do you see the energy mix in Africa at the moment? And how do you see it changing? Because you're at the coalface, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a very, very good question. Clearly Africa has a lot of power needs. And clearly there's opportunities for big power plants with transmission and distribution. But the challenges for Africa are really right now. If I think about the big projects and the big programs, those tend to be 2 to 3 years of feasibility study and 2 to 3 years of permitting and evaluation and finance activity, and then 2 to 3 years of or more of installation. So you start talking about things moving on a decade-to-decade basis, and Africa really doesn't have time for that. And so I think there's lots of conversations in the sessions here today and around the hall talking about what can we do faster than that. And a lot of that's taken up, that void is filled by short-term diesel power plants, rental, year-to-year type power plants. But what you're seeing now also, in addition to that, are these microgrid hybrid systems, which are more a smaller distributed system through a network, whether that's rural electrification mindset or it's a build out of a city. And I think that's a fundamental change. If I just compare it to the telecommunications space, right? Many places in Africa didn't have cell phones, didn't have telephones, didn't have power. Today you go to those places and in many places people have smartphones that don't even really have reliable power. And it's quite an amazing shift, and they've done that because of, without big infrastructure. They've skipped the phases of big central infrastructure for the telecommunications. I think there's that same opportunity that's exciting here in Africa, in the African market, to be able to have skip a lot of the steps that require the big transmission and that big investment.
You end up with this distributed generation, distributed network. So are you saying that? And I want to cross-check this because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Right.
The concept of a microgrid can go from within a building to actually quite a large scale. There's some announcements that Alstom made about Philadelphia Navy Yard, for example. That's not insignificant.
Sure.
So it's taking some of that same technology, and again, one of the other misconceptions when people talk about microgrids is that we're talking about rural stuff, but this is not necessarily.
No, it's right. So you can have university campuses and others that are grid connected microgrids, but you can manage it. And technology is really advancing very quickly. If you compare from a microgrid perspective, the components of a microgrid, and for us oftentimes that's a diesel system to give you a backbone. If there is a grid connection, it's not robust. But if there's not a grid connection, it's a diesel backbone. But then you have other sources of energy, whether it's wind or solar or some energy storage in that system. And if you think about that from a what is a microgrid, just take each one of those systems. PV costs have dropped dramatically. So now that is very attractive. Energy storage is trailing PV by just a couple of years.
But if Elon has his way, it's going to drop, right?
So he's a very good promoter, and so that's great for the industry because it brings attention to it, and it's wonderful to help accelerate that curve to make it catch up with solar and some of the advancements there. But there's also a lot of things happening on the load side. as we have better communication tools and better ability to manage what's happening when loads are brought on and off within a microgrid. So within a group of energy resources and within a group of loads, to be able to manage that and have smart systems, that is a quantum leap from where we were just a few years ago in terms of what it really costs to do that and execute that, and that's what's so exciting. I think that's what's going to enable us to bring power to Africa.
So when you come in as Caterpillar,
Yes.
And let's imagine for a second we're going to do a microgrid, right? You and I are in this project. We're going to do a microgrid. What's Caterpillar's role? Could you do the entire thing, or how are you going to market with that?
Yeah. So if you think about microgrids in general, Caterpillar's been doing microgrids since we shipped our first diesel genset, 90 years ago, or provided a gas turbine for a site, whether it was a mine or industrial or village. We've been doing it for a long time. What's different now is we're just adding in some additional energy resources. So you're pulling in energy from the sun instead of the fossil fuel. So we're displacing the fossil fuel.
A lot of complexity on a data connection and things like that.
You're adding in some interface and some system controls. And if I compare it to Toyota Prius, right? You have a system there that is has bidirectional inverter to be able to store and pull power from the energy storage. Caterpillar has those same technology. We have hybrid machines and capabilities that give us that experience and intellectual property to be able to design and install a system that works.
And so obviously you'd like to see more of the sort of microgrid solutions being taken up and so on, because they fill a number of gaps. One, their speed to execution is a whole lot faster. You've got quite a nice mix of energy that you can put in. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is, and it may well be happening, but what's stopping this micro approach out here? Why are you having to be at an event like this to kind of push that position? I mean, is there a disconnect somewhere in thinking, or?
So that's a good question, very good question. So Caterpillar, for example, has been following the microgrid business for 10 years and doing projects for military or for other customers. But what's changed is with the costs coming down for solar, for energy storage, now we've reached that tipping point where the economics now work from more places, and it's not just a subsidy driven or it's good for the environment. We're reducing CO2, but it's also a good business situation. And so that's what's so exciting about it. And again, by having the Caterpillar system where we have our own Cat brand solar, Cat brand energy storage, we can put that together in a system that's replicatable. So you can place that in a remote village and know that it's going to be there, and there's a Cat dealer service network that's able to take care of it. That gives people peace of mind, so it's bankable, so it can be executed on.
So do you think, and we'll just, let's blue sky for a second,
sure.
That we could get to a situation where, let's take the context of Southern Africa with the rolling blackouts and stuff like that, where a sort of a business park, for example, would get together and say, look, we're just not happy with this anymore. It's affecting our business, and the traditional power investment network would be cut out. That this collection of businesses could come to someone like you. There are other people who do this, but someone like you, and go, listen, can you help us?
You bet.
Can you put this together for us?
And so for us, it's a relatively easy exercise when we know some history, especially if you know any of the load history, to really understand what the cycles are night to day and other time. We can go in and say, with that geography, here's the optimum mix of solar. Here's what we recommend for energy storage. And here's what we recommend for a base, whether it's a gas reciprocating genset or a gas turbine or a diesel. And we can help the customer through that discussion and then deliver with our dealer network, deliver on that and be able to do a long-term program for them.
What does that do to the utility business model, though?
So the utility business model will struggle in those cases if and when they have additional cost challenges. So for a utility, their big challenge is as more and more people begin to add renewable or separate or partially separate. There's that grid stability challenge that they have to manage, and so what the utilities are doing now, they're wanting to talk to us as well about what do we do as utility to manage our network, give us more flexibility and firming capability.
Because one of their worst nightmares must be, again, let's take an extreme scenario, everybody goes off grid.
Yes.
They're just left holding the can with this infrastructure that's serving nobody.
Well, so a good, efficient, large utility is going to be a good power supply source if it's reliable and it's always there. And there's still that, to me, that base fundamental utility. In places where there's a large central population, that makes sense. Where the microgrids make sense is when you have significant distances, large infrastructure requirements. Now, utilities are struggling. In a whole area, people all put solar installations in. Now they don't. There's enough renewable, which is intermittent, that causes grid disruptions and grid challenges, and that's where we then work with the utility to help offset that. But the utilities definitely have a challenge because the system is designed to have central plant and everything flows out.
Yes.
Now there are changes coming.
Suddenly it's coming back.
There's changes coming to be able to handle both ways, and I know there's lots of discussions about that here today as well. But that's all part of the development and where we're headed.
And is that as well some of the sort of maybe innovative partnerships that a company like Caterpillar can drive and say, look, let's work with you guys rather than have a sort of conflict scenario?
Yeah, so with the utilities, again, I think some of the smaller utilities, the municipal or village, town, more regionally controlled, have been more flexible, wanting to reach out and look to those opportunities from people like Caterpillar, and we're happy to work with them on that.
So just as we end with our time here, do you see that there's anything unique with a microgrid financing model, or is it the same ecosystem that we've got here, just maybe a bit smaller, a bit different? Is there something?
That's a very good question as well, because oftentimes when you think about financing for microgrids, and if you're looking at big financial groups, they want to finance big power projects because the amount of effort required to do a small project is the same amount of effort to do a large project. And so that's where it's important to be able to aggregate. So working with a government, a minister, and looking at the plans to be able to talk about, well, we really need to do 10 microgrids systems here rather than a central plant. But the aggregate of those 10 microgrids then starts to look like a small plant, and therefore the finance starts to make sense and be more familiar to the people working those types of projects.
So you're solving their problem by saying, look, think of this as one big power plant. Forget the fact that it's done.
And there are people working on trying to be able to be more cost effective and do smaller projects, but there's a comfort level when you start talking about bigger projects, same amount of manpower, process, paperwork to do that.
Well, that ties in nicely with the interview we did earlier with the Development Bank of South Africa. So maybe you guys need to get together because they're thinking along the same way. But Rob, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. And thank you as well for watching. This is another interview at AEF TV in association with Engerati. Many more to come. And if you're watching this afterwards, you can just watch away. There'll be loads on there on this link. Thank you.